agenda behind all the officers at the side there by the front door. And of course, the full packet is available online on our website. We're going to start this evening with a proclamation. And I believe Commissioner Reed, are you going to read that for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. It's my honor to read this proclamation in recognition of veterans. My partner and many of my family members are veterans, so I appreciate this opportunity to recognize them in our community. So Operation Greenlight is November 4th to 11th, 2024. Whereas the residents of Douglas County have great respect, admiration, and the utmost gratitude for all the men and women and people who have selflessly served our country and this community in the armed forces. And whereas the contributions and sacrifices of those who served in the armed forces have been vital in maintaining the freedoms and way of life enjoyed by our citizens. And whereas Douglas County seeks to honor individuals who have made countless sacrifices for freedom by placing themselves in harm's way for the good of all. And whereas veterans continue to serve our community in the American Legion, veterans of foreign wars, religious groups, civil service, and by functioning as county veteran service officers in 29 states to help fellow former service members access more than $52 billion in federal health, disability, and compensation benefits each year. And whereas approximately 200,000 service members transition to civilian communities annually, and whereas studies indicate that 44 to 72% of service members experience high levels of stress during transition from military to civilian life, and whereas active military service members transitioning from military service are at high risk for suicide during their first year after military service, and whereas the National Association of Counties encourages all counties, parishes, and boroughs to recognize Operation Greenlight for veterans. And whereas Douglas County appreciates the sacrifices of our United States military personnel and believes specific recognition should be granted. Now, therefore, the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County, Kansas, do hereby proclaim November 4th to 11th, 2024 as Operation Greenlight Week. Douglas County urges all citizens to join in this observation, adopted this 6th day of November 2024.
Thanks, Commissioners. I'm going to say a few words and recognize a couple employees that are veterans in our organization. Douglas County is proud to join hundreds of counties across the nation in Operation Greenlight in an effort to show veterans that their service and sacrifice are recognized, appreciated, and supported. Our military members and their families make incredible sacrifices for our safety and security every single day, and we want to extend our heartfelt thank you for their services. Douglas County has 43 county employees that are veterans. We're fortunate to have 2 of them here with us today. Sergeant Alex Kling, come forward, please, of the Sheriff's Office, who served 4 years in the Marine Corps and was a sergeant, and our Director of Emergency Management, Robert Benecki, who served in the Navy and the Navy Reserves for over 22 years, retiring in 2004. During his time in the Navy, he served on the maintenance crew for the Blue Angels. Thank you both for your service in the military and your dedication and hard work as county employees. We are shining a green light in the county courthouse and the Judicial and Law Enforcement Center this week to show our support for veterans and their families, and we invite local citizens and businesses to join us in honoring them. And we have a little gift to thank you for your service, and we're going to be distributing these to all of our employees that are veterans. So. Thank you. See, it's got the green one. So thank you so much. I want your picture. Okay.
Can I also add a shout out to my dad for his military service, and to my cousins Russell and Darren, and a lot of the folks that I serve with on our volunteer fire department. That seems to be a safe place to land between military service and civilian life. So thank you. Thank you. So thank you all for letting us do that. For the rest of the evening, we have 3 items on our consent agenda. We'll have general public comment, and then we have 4 items for our regular agenda where we also take public comment, and then we'll do appointments, miscellaneous, before we adjourn. So for our consent agenda, We will ask if anyone would like to pull an item from that consent agenda, and then we will take a vote on that. For public comment, we have a recent federal court decision to provide clarity on what constitutes public comment. For that, each speaker will be limited to a total of 3 minutes of speaking time. Individual speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers, and all comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. We also maintain the decorum of our meeting. We prohibit comments that are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent, fighting words, slander, or speech that invades the privacy of individuals, unreasonably loud, disruptive, or repetitive, or that interrupt or substantially interfere with the board's ability to conduct county business. We do reserve the right to mute or remove any speaker who violates public comment rules. At that time, we'll ask for your full name and address for the meeting minutes and to have your comments directed to the County Commission. Please know that comments received by the Commission during our meetings do not necessarily represent the views of Douglas County government, but that we value the input. We don't usually respond to general public comment on the spot, but if you leave your contact information with county staff, we will try and get specific questions answered. After general public comment, we have our regular agenda, and for each item there, we hear from staff or an applicant, followed by questions from the commission, and then open the item up for public comment relevant to that item. Once public comment is closed, we bring the item back to the commission for further discussion and a vote. And lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on the county's YouTube page and website. So commissioners, do you have any items from our consent agenda you'd like to pull for further discussion? Okay. Is there any member of the public who would like to pull an item from our consent agenda for further discussion? Seeing none in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone online? Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve consent agenda items 1, 2, and 3.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Now we have a time for general public comment. Is there anyone who would like to come up and give 3 minutes of public comment? Okay, seeing no general public comment. Sarah, do we have anyone online with a hand raised? All right, thank you. So closing general public comment and bring it to our first regular agenda item, and that is the Entrepreneur Listening Project.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm going to move a couple of our virtual guests that are, actually, I need Robin, if you could move. Okay. Yes, please. Commissioners, we've got some guests that are joining us virtually, and then my colleague, Connie Fiorella Fitzpatrick is here today as well, and she'll be speaking along with, we're joined by Faye Horwit, the Executive Director of Forward Cities, and also my colleague, Nicole Riles, that's a community member that's been working on the Entrepreneur Listening Project. I outlined in the cover memo some background on this project, which I think you all are reasonably familiar with, and the timing of tonight's presentation is nice because you're also going to hear about some of the other ARPA-funded projects, and this was one of the projects that you all funded, and we dutifully spent all those funds, which made Brooke really happy. All the funds were expended, and I think what you're going to hear tonight is how the dollars were utilized, how we are capstoning this project in a way that we hope kicks off perhaps a future chapter of it. But as I outlined in the cover memo, we set off on this project in partnering with Forward Cities, which is a national leader in assisting communities in understanding what does a more equitable entrepreneurial ecosystem look like. We set out on that journey after observing some of the experiences that our entrepreneurs of color experienced coming out of the pandemic, and also just acknowledging some of the things that have been observed for a good amount of time to understand what are the pressures, what are the barriers, what are the obstacles, what are the successes that are being experienced by our entrepreneurs of color. And when I say we, the we in that is our Douglas County entrepreneurship community. Douglas County, through a partnership with Network Kansas, serves as a e-entrepreneurship community, which means that we facilitate discussions of stakeholders that care about supporting entrepreneurship throughout our community. Part of that, a big part of that is administering a loan program and then and access to other loan products that Network Kansas awards or provides access to different e-communities. Lawrence, or Douglas County, is an e-community that is dedicated to serving all of Douglas County outside of the city of Lawrence. But over the past few years, we have also become more inclusive as a community of including the city, entrepreneurs and stakeholders in the city of Lawrence, even though there is a Lawrence Metro e-community that specifically offers products to the loan programs to entrepreneurs that are located within the city of Lawrence for specific audiences, women and minority owned entrepreneurs. So we work collaboratively. We think of, when we say e-community, we're thinking big tent, and we include a lot of diverse partners. We have bi-weekly meetings, or bi-monthly meetings, excuse me, and we're engaged in everything from the Youth Entrepreneurship Challenge to supporting the different partners. But the Entrepreneur Listening Project was something that came out of the discussions that we had in February of 2023, facilitated by Forward Cities. So I'm going to hand it off to Faye Horwit, who's going to share screen and maybe reintroduce herself to some of you and folks in this room, and what their role's been with this project. And she's going to present the findings of the Entrepreneur Listening Project.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jill. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
All right, beautiful. It's lovely to be with you all this evening. I appreciate having the time to share. And I will say I'm a little bit biased in working with Douglas County. I will admit that they're one of my favorite communities that I've ever worked with in my work at Forward Cities. Forward Cities has worked in 50 plus communities, and I can't seem to let these guys go because they're doing some beautiful work, and I'm grateful to be able to have a chance to share what that looks like from our lens. And so this evening, what I'd like to do is share some key learnings and what are our recommendations for sustaining that work. And that's coming from my expert lens, having done this work in 50 plus communities around the country. The work that we came to support originally in Douglas County was funded by the UN Marion Kaufman Foundation. And Douglas County was one of two communities that we visited as a tour to be able to bring some facilitation opportunity to local community to pull together those exact champions of entrepreneurs together in the community to talk about what could sometimes be some challenging issues, which is around how do you make sure there's equitable opportunity for all entrepreneurs. We engage in a dynamic 3-day experience that was kicked off by a tour where we got to meet quite a few local businesses, had some really amazing conversations to understand their lived experience as entrepreneurs of color in the Douglas County ecosystem, as well as some of the folks who are those champions and leaders who represent those entrepreneurs. We wanted to prioritize equity as a foundational value of economic development and recovery, and really be able to lend our shared understandings of that work to local leaders, with the goal of equipping local leaders with the knowledge and skills needed to grow and sustain the efforts, rather than us coming in and doing the things and then communities feeling like they have no way to carry the work forward. Our goal was to really equip folks on the ground with some leadership skills to carry that work forward. And we prioritize also that it must be a collaborative effort. When you are doing an ecosystem building, there's no one entity or organization that should be carrying all the water, or that should be getting all the funding, or that should be doing all the work, particularly when you're focused on leaning into equity and inclusion. We had some fantastic local supporters and sponsors, including obviously the county is the lead on that, and what came out of that 3-day experience was the idea of this listening project that the group eventually decided that they wanted to work on collaboratively. And our original goal as an organization was to help the community to see these entrepreneurs very distinctively and recognize their value, to support them more collectively, so that it's not these siloed efforts and this fighting and scrapping for little bits of funding, but how can you work together to make a bigger pie? And then also, how can you sustain those entrepreneurs in a way that makes up for inequities that they have experienced historically? And on the ground there for our 3 days, what we heard and listened very intently to everyone that we talked to in those settings. And by day 3, we, the community, Douglas County entrepreneurs and the leaders that serve them, entrepreneurs of color specifically, came up with this priority question, this asset-based question that they wanted to try and lean into to figure out. How might we foster an ecosystem culture that equitably centers and values entrepreneurial leaders of color? And really important here, I think something to point out is this idea of culture. What does that look like? This is not a one and done, that is not a one and done program, but how could they create something collaboratively together that would shift the way people think and the way they behave and the way they show up together? Centering equity. And then the other important piece is making sure that you are valuing the people who have been on the ground, supporting these entrepreneurs year in and year out, and often not getting the funding that they need to actually do the work well, because traditionally a lot of that funding goes directly to institutional types of organizations. So we wanted to see how we can help value and prioritize grassroots organizations in this. Some of our key learnings, and I'll share, these are some that we shared in the final report, that stories have this amazing potential to bridge divides. And if you can tell the story of entrepreneurs of color, it makes them more visible, and people are able to, once they see them, be able to understand how to more effectively support them in ways that are culturally grounded for them. 2, entrepreneurs are human beings first. So thinking about not just about the business, but about the individual and what do they need. And that means that there are some things beyond the business that need to be addressed first, including some of the challenges that they may have faced and some of the trust issues they have around some of the support providers in the community. Number 3, businesses need support at every stage. Often what we find is there's a lot of business 101 kind of things. There's about a lot of early stage, but not a lot of efforts and programs and opportunities to help businesses to grow over their life cycle. Number 4, disparities must be viewed from an intersectional perspective. And so you can't just take entrepreneurship by itself. If you look at what we did was look at the Douglas County poverty study, and we tried to link and look at those, what is intersectional about that, and how might there be other types of entities or organizations that can get involved to support this effort, so that you can take a holistic approach. 5, access to capital is vital. You can't just offer training. There's some folks that say in the business that we're in, no training without capital, no capital without training. And we believe that that's also important. Number 6, cultural and language barriers must be factored in. There's no one size fits all. We heard very clearly that there were very unique needs for Black entrepreneurs, for Hispanic entrepreneurs, and for Indigenous entrepreneurs in Douglas County. And they all had a very distinct and unique lived experience. And we wanted to, the Listening Project was built to be able to understand those needs. Number 7, entrepreneurial representation and visibility matter. And that means that the folks that are doing the work as champions and as leaders, they're often entrepreneurs themselves, and they are doing this in addition to sometimes either having a full-time job, trying to build their own business. And then on top of that, they're often trying to support other entrepreneurs of color because none of them are getting the support they need from institutional partners often, or institutional providers, in a way that fits them from their cultural lens. Number 8, equitable leadership is critical and should be compensated, because these folks have been often volunteering their time and showing up and leaning in and not being compensated for it. We wanted to find a way to make sure that that happened. And that was an integrated part of this project. Number 9, power dynamics and level of trust can impact collaboration. And so what we've seen across every ecosystem that Ford Cities has ever worked in is often the work can slow down, because unless you deal with power dynamics between entities, between organizations, and between individuals. And sometimes if you want the work to actually happen, you have to slow down. And you have to actually work through some of those issues and not try and bulldoze through them or rush past them. Number 10, most importantly, true systems change takes sustainable investment and patience. You cannot expect any type of long-term systems change to happen in the span of a year of funding. And so we want to make sure we look at this lens at Ford Cities from 2 perspectives. You can take it from a traditional economic development top-down approach, which is you set policies, programs, and capital that attract or fund large kind of unicorn kind of companies. Often that's high tech, high growth. And based on that, you develop support infrastructures and sometimes prioritize coalitions that will then build those tech and scalable businesses. And then if one or two out of the hundreds you try and attract or develop are successful, then you tell that one unicorn story and sort of, hang a hat on that for a few years. And we prioritize this idea of shifting a theory of change to something that's more inside out. And this idea of starting with mental models, shifting a community mindset to see all makers, dreamers, and doers as valuable to the economy. And then building on that, relationships and representative leader and shared power to be able to create an equitable culture. And once you're able to do that, then you can then develop policy programs and capital funding flows that prioritize sustainability and equity. But it's got to be from the bottom up. So our recommendations going forward to the group that has continued to meet diligently over the last year or so to continue this work, year and a half, host a second town hall to share the learnings and the recommendations, and to really have a capstone around what was learned and what might come next. Share the video that was produced widely to help people hear and see those stories of entrepreneurs and what they're experiencing and what they need. To conduct funder follow-up, so all of the sponsors that were part of the effort to be able to go back to them individually and say, this is why this was important, and this is why we'd love to have your support going forward. So similar to what we're doing right now. Continue meeting and collaborating, and the group, they've been great about that, and we encourage them to keep doing that and inviting other folks that are also supportive. Explore cross-community learning, so wherever possible for them to connect with other communities who are trying to do similar work and learn from them. Pursue other and more sustainable funding opportunities as a group to continue this work, and that includes ones that are maybe local, but also some that might be regional or national. And that is, what I would hope to be able to share and impart with you all today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, forward@forwardcities.org, and happy to answer any questions you may have after Nicole has a chance to share as well.
Thanks, Faye. Nicole, if you want to unmute and offer your perspectives and what your role's been in this project.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Riles, and I am an entrepreneur in Douglas County. I have a private practice as a therapy consultant and clinician, and I also operate a nonprofit organization. So coming into this project really centered around my lived experience as an entrepreneur first. I've also had a wonderful opportunity to engage with the E partnership, the E3 community, several of the partnership organizations that are represented. And of course, working with Faye and her team has just been a really phenomenal experience in being able to drive the level of expertise that they bring into Douglas County, and to have the ongoing support of Jill and the county to just push this forward. So timing wise, I do feel, as others have said, this is essential to where we are. We had the fortunate opportunity to engage with some wonderful entrepreneurs, people who are wearing multiple hats, doing several things, and really leading with from this space of equity and wanting to enhance their community and bring culture to the community. So for all the things that we talk about, we dream about, really placing value on what that means and what it can mean for Douglas County, and the fact that when entrepreneurs succeed, our city, our county succeeds, our community succeeds. So I've just been appreciative of being a part of this project. One of the things that has really resonated, as Faye spoke to, is the ability to organically shape what this has become. I became involved in this project. Really, I went to a meeting, right? I was part of that 3-day meeting, and I went there with curiosity and being able to just be open and engage, and found myself, leaning into the work. So one of the things that I recall from those initial discussions around this listening project was very clear in how we wanted to do the work. And here we are, almost 2 years later, and I found that the way we've organically shaped it, the things we've learned, the outcomes that we've had, the ability to unearth some areas where we need to work on trust building and collaboration and system trust building between systems and organizations. Those are the things that this project has really unearthed and brought to the level of surface. So we are just now, I feel like, positioning ourselves to do greater work. As Faye mentioned, as Jill mentioned, the sustainability of keeping this type of momentum and the ability to support this effort with the lens of people first and valuing the person, valuing entrepreneurship, valuing a diversity of entrepreneurship is really where we are positioned well to move that forward. So I'm excited about the opportunity to do more, and looking forward to just the engagement of the partners and others who have worked well in this program.
Thanks, Nicole. I want to invite Connie up to talk about what her role's been in this project, and then we'll talk about just some next steps for you all, and then open it up for questions, if that sounds okay.
Hello, my name is Connie Fitzpatrick. I am the Food System Specialist for Douglas County, so I primarily serve the Food Policy Council. But for this effort, I have served as a convener, particularly for the listening session that took a year ago, October 21st, for Spanish speakers at La Estrella Tienda Mexicana. And similar to Nicole, I joined this initiative. I attended a meeting, and I was not sure of what the meeting was going to be about, and then became of a leadership role to advance this work. But it's been a year since the listening session took place at La Estrella Tienda Mexicana, and I would say that between then and now, our partners in Douglas County has made some initiatives and moves towards the goals and values of E3. So for example, the Food Policy Council started the initiative of the Indigenous Food System Study and Action Plan to figure out what are the needs for the Indigenous community. Also with the Online Restaurant Academy, sorry, we have not spent those ARPA funds yet, but we will finish that very shortly. That Online Restaurant Academy, in partnership with Network Kansas, supported 10 new entrepreneurs, and the majority of those were BIPOC food entrepreneurs, and they got scholarships to attend that training. So like Faye mentioned, training paired with capital, so we're hoping that those will, there will be an opportunity for them in the future. But what I'm most curious about the outcomes of this initiative is that our partners and our team knows what the needs are. We see the support, and we have started creating some action and momentum towards supporting BIPOC entrepreneurs in Douglas County. But what I'm curious about is the sustainability of it. For example, I happen to be bilingual. I mean, I actually speak 4 languages, but I happen to speak Spanish, so I was able to lead this work, and I have been able to support Spanish-speaking entrepreneurs to apply for grants, like through the Heartland Regional Food Business Center in partnership with K-State, and other efforts in Spanish, but it just because I happen to be a Spanish speaker, and thinking about the sustainability beyond myself, and if I go somewhere else, like who's going to fulfill this role for Douglas County. I know that K-State has recently hired actually a Food Policy Council member, Quinlan Cartar, who's also a Spanish speaker, and she is a new liaison to the Heartland Business Food Center. But their role is to do bilingual work to support Spanish speakers, entrepreneurs as well in the food industry, so farmers, food trucks, etc. So I'm really optimistic of this work, and most interested in how to continue to sustain it. Thank you.
So one of the things that's referenced in our materials, and I failed to provide you a link with, but I kind of want to have you wait until November 19th is going to be our second convening. Faye's going to be coming to town to support us in facilitating that session, and we are going to formally screen the video that tells the stories. A ton of time was invested on the part of Connie and Nicole, and eventually we did bring Faye back into the fold, but through an extended contract with Forward Cities, because one of the points that Faye made on her, on the key learnings, number 9 was power dynamics and the level of trust can impact collaboration. The power, that was certainly something that has been at play these last couple of years. And in the end, it is a good story, but I'd be lying if I didn't say it was a really frustrating, hard story as well. There was a lot of power dynamics within the ecosystem of folks that had great intent and a desire to make progress, but it looked differently to different folks. And one of the key roles that Faye was able to play, along with one of her colleagues, Magali, was to just be that neutral third party that was able to help center what were the original goals of this project and how can we stay true to those goals and tell a compelling story that helps us make progress in this space. So I think we've done that. And again, I don't think we could have done it if we hadn't had a lot of determination and focus on the original goal on the part of Connie and Nicole. Faye, our partners at the Small Business Development Center, I added some comments that they had. They could not be with us today. The Small Business Development Center partners with CORE that stuck with this project and really want to see it move to the next phase. So November 19th at the Lead Center, each of the commissioners should have received invitations to that. I hope you can join us. We've tried to invite a diversity of stakeholders. We'd like some entrepreneurs to join us as well. And we've been strategic in sending out some invitations to that. And we hope to have a larger conversation about what does the next step look like for this, this project and how do we stay true to it. So with that, I don't know if I left anything out, Faye or Connie or Nicole, or we can open it up for questions.
No, I think you hit it.
Right, thank you all for the update and kind of keeping us moving with this project. And Commissioner Reed, you were also involved pretty heavily with the meetings and the. Do you have anything you want to add to what we've heard tonight?
I appreciate that invitation. It's generous to say I was involved with a lot of the meetings, to be candid. This past year, my schedule has conflicted with a lot, but certainly on the front end of the process and the initial visit was really invested in some of those early conversations and have followed along and been really proud to see that there was value given to the evident need to sort of pause and do some different ways of regrouping and organizing trust building in ways that I just think were necessary. And so I'm grateful for that. And I do think that to me, there's been some evident evolution, if you will, over the past year and a half or so of in our e-community meetings and discussions amongst partners. And so I'm excited for that.
Do you have a quick question? What time at the Lead Center on November 19th for folks that want to come to that?
It's going to be at 3 o'clock.
3 p.m. Thanks.
Yeah.
Mr. Kelly, any questions, thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation and all the work here. Faye, I heard you say in your comments that funding traditionally goes towards established organizations. And so I think if the goal is to center around equity and to really center around those entrepreneurs, I was hoping that there would be somewhat of a recommendation about how we look at funding a little differently. That's a big part of our role and the dollars that we have. Do you or Nicole or Connie or Jill have any recommendations around thinking about how we might disrupt the systems that we're part of and how we fund certain organizations? I know this probably is coming off as a threat to some people, but I think it's a healthy conversation to have.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'm glad you understand the sensitivity around it. I think one of the things that tends to happen is the way we encourage communities to do ecosystem building work is actually to have a coalition, a collective. What often happens when you try and convene these collectives is that the folks who are institutional partners that are used to leading and being in charge and deciding what happens, that they want to continue that sort of way of being. And so that's how they show up in that collective space. And what we wanted to encourage a lot of them to think about was this is an equity project, not just in the outcome, but in the how, not in the what, but in the how. And that means that we needed to center leadership of color in this initiative. And it's not to say that there aren't leaders of color in other institutions and sort of larger organizations, but often it's the grassroots organizations and the individual entrepreneurial champions that miss out on the funding to support the work that they're going to do anyway. These folks are doing it because there's a gap and there's a need. And so what we're recommending is finding ways to compensate and support the work that's already going to be done. So Connie kind of spoke to it, and that is, she was leaning in to play an additional role just because she happens to speak Spanish. That was not her role to do that, right? And so being able to have funds available for someone to do translation services and or to bring certain lens from different communities, I think is really important. And I think funding the collective work is important, but also having some third party or entity that is local that can play the convener role, that is not competing for funding, right? So they're not sort of an equal entity or organization to other people at the table, but their role is sort of to play that neutral third party. And so those are some things that I would recommend you look at in terms of funding.
Thank you. Thanks for the specificity too.
Mm-hmm.
Jill, you started the conversation talking about also we do this youth entrepreneurship challenge, and we really bring these conversations to younger Douglas County citizens. Also, is there a pretty good age spread that's been involved with our E3 conversations, or are there opportunities to kind of expand that into our younger generations also?
I think I don't know if we have. I'd have to look at some of the interviews that we've done, but I don't for the Entrepreneur Listening Project, but I think it's a huge opportunity. One of the things that really struck me on a recent field trip that the entrepreneurs community, the e-community took to Topeka to an organization that's it's a BIPOC entrepreneur support space that's in Topeka called Omni Circle, and they have a whole suite of programming just for young entrepreneurs. So they've been able to do the things that we kind of talk about aspirationally, the entrepreneur support programming for entrepreneurs of color that we've been, aspiring to think more about having in this community. They've been able to do those things in that space, but they've been also able to fold in the youth development work as well, along with some other incredible how do you support the whole entrepreneur, which was one of the points that Faye had there too. It's an incredible space that's just one way I've seen that operationalized. But I think that you've pointed out a good opportunity for us as we continue to push this flywheel forward to see what it looks like. And one of the things that we've talked about is, how do we, in terms of testing what this could look like, what's the tangible next steps? Ideas that have come out have been pursuing a feasibility study as, pieces come together of what this could look like. So that would be an important part that we could add into that, I think.
Commissioners, other thoughts or questions before we go to public comment?
I was going to say one more thing. One other potential opportunity for funding might be having a part-time or full-time ecosystem builder whose sole role this work is, right? So rather than a convening entity, you might have an individual that sits either in a government position, in a grassroots organization, or in a philanthropic entity or foundation, can also be a very good investment to carry some of this work forward.
Thank you. This is we don't take a vote on this item, it's informational, but it's also open for public comment. Is there anyone in the room who'd like to make public comment on this item? Sarah, do we have anyone online who'd like to make comment? Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any other thoughts or final questions? I'm excited to attend the second town hall. I was part of the first 3-day meeting and been able to kind of keep tabs on a lot of this work that's been going on. So yeah, November 19th. Commissioners, anything else?
No, just a thank you. I am also looking forward to November 19th and excited to have you come back to our community. Hopefully we'll have good weather for you, Faye.
So thank
Sounds
you to
good,
everyone.
y'all. Yeah, they can't keep me away. Like we were supposed to be done with this like a year ago, but I will say I continue to want to support and lean in because I see the passion of the folks that are keep showing up, and so there's a handful of folks that have been through this, and Connie and and Nicole and Jill are committed to making this this work to center it, continuing to center it and not let it go. And when you see commitment like that, it makes folks want to lean in and support. So I look forward to seeing you all.
Thank you, and thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
That moves us to our next item. It is a zoning and codes item on Washington Creek nature-based solutions. And I believe we have some of our zoning and codes team.
Tanya, yeah, I think Tanya's going to kick us off.
Good evening, Commissioners. We're loading the slides right now for the presentation. I'm Tanya Voigt. I'm the Zoning and Codes Director. Will Zung with Stantec is here tonight to share the final report on a pilot watershed study of Washington Creek. Washington Creek is located southwest of Lawrence. They were selected by the Kansas Department of Agriculture to study potential flood mitigation actions applicable to Kansas watersheds. KDA used the allocated FEMA funds to fund this pilot study. Stantec and Douglas County identified Washington Creek as an ideal watershed. The watershed has similarities to Wildcat Creek in Manhattan, which has seen extensive flood damage in urbanized areas due to development. Washington Creek is similarly situated upstream from areas that may see development in the future. This study is conceptual only and could provide tools for future decisions, but would need to be a part of many future conversations. Will is here tonight to present Stantec's findings.
All right, thank you, Tanya. Hope you can hear me okay. Thanks for this opportunity. To provide a little more context from myself and for this project. So I've been William Zung, so I've been living in Lawrence for 26 years. Got my master's degree at KU in Water Resources Science. I've been a certified floodplain manager for, what is it now, 21 years. And been a consultant to the Kansas Department of Agriculture for the same 21 years, as well as consulted to FEMA in different programs for 22 years. So I got a current role now working with Kansas Department of Agriculture to provide flood risk analysis, flood risk mapping, look at different floodplain management mitigation actions. Then also a role working with FEMA headquarters on writing guidance to implement their policies related to flood risk management, and also help promote flood risk data to try to make risk-informed decisions. So that's kind of a context behind this project, why Kansas Department of Agriculture was able to fund this project through some FEMA allocations to not just map floodplain boundaries that we're familiar with flood insurance rate maps, but to provide risk information, flood risk data, a lot more robust modeling that's available so that folks could use it, see it, touch it, see it in different aspects to make some decisions from it.
Can I ask kind of a background question? This could be
Yes, please.
for either for Tanya. Was this initiated because of the two major flood events we've had in the last 6 years in the Washington Creek area that didn't match what FEMA had been telling us should happen?
Kind of, sort of. So the project itself was related to just in general throughout the state of Kansas, what sort of mitigation actions related to nature-based solutions could be applied throughout the state. So we had a project where we looked at different nature-based solutions, what are applicable for the state of Kansas, because we hear about it in national news, we heard a lot about it in coastal areas, but what's applicable in Kansas. So we made a report to kind of list kind of a top 10 list of these are nature-based solutions that should work in Kansas. Related to that was looking at roadway overtopping and flash flood risk, because we get a lot of roadways that overtop. Deaths happen from people driving in floodwaters, so they want to look at where is a good place for that. The third piece of this is try to leverage existing modeling, existing studies that are already taking place throughout the state. Washington Creek kind of hit all these criteria because, one, we had the past flood events from 2019. I'll show some photos of that. We already had some good two-dimensional modeling that KDA's other contractors were already producing and had a draft version of that for us to use. The city of Lawrence was also looking at climate change for increased precipitation, also through some funding through the Kansas Department of Agriculture. And then, we live here and it's a great place to be. So everything came together just right. Okay, let's see if this works. So basic agenda, we got a lot of slides. I may speed through some of these. So we'll just look at Washington Creek, talk a little bit about flash flooding, and a little bit about the watershed characteristics, and then what nature-based solutions could be applicable for this watershed. A little bit about our modeling that we've performed, then results, and kind of in conclusion. So flash flood risk, or just general flood risk, this is super important to remember for this watershed as we go along. It's good to know in general. So we have flash flood hazards essentially on the side, and then flash flood vulnerability or just consequences. And that really, the combination of those two make the risk. So you can reduce hazards to reduce risk. You could also not change the hazard and just reduce your exposure to that hazard to reduce your risk. So that's going to be very important to remember. So your flash flood hazards, you got your rainfall intensity. So as rainfall intensity is increasing, the ability for that runoff to come out down your streams and flood places quickly is just heightened. Your catchment area, how big your watershed area, the slope of it makes a difference. Soil type, this is going to be pretty important in this watershed where you could have very clayey soils that don't absorb water. They absorb water a little bit, but then it quickly runs off, versus a sandy soil that soaks in the water some more. So this watershed has a very clayey type of soil, so it hits it and it runs off pretty quickly. Whereas your vulnerability, you could think about the buildings in a floodplain or roadways, but also you could think about what sort of operation and maintenance you do, or some sort of emergency actions you do to keep people out of harm's way. That also helps reduce down the vulnerability if you're able to keep people out of harm's way. So there's a bunch of different aspects that could apply to the vulnerability here. But then basically your flash flood, your impact area is down to your human population, your buildings, your vehicles. So if you could keep that human population out of that harm's way, it really reduces down your risk. So how does that apply to Washington Creek? Essentially just a quick map of the study area. Your watershed essentially from Lone Star Lake that drains into Lone Star Lake and then all the way downstream into the confluence of the Wakarusa River. So it's a pretty undeveloped area right now. So pretty large watershed, pretty hilly, and then also some flat areas. So we talked about the engagement a little bit. So we talked to the county officials. We've also talked to the city of Lawrence, talked to KDA about some of this data. We also look at some of the other state resources. So the Kansas Water Plan, there's also a hazard mitigation plan that identifies keeping areas in open space for flood mitigation. Watershed protection, so the water quality aspect of this is a component as well. And then the federal sources such as your FEMA's flood insurance rate maps, NOAA for their storm events, they have a rainfall precipitation values. And then also just EPA's kind of just understanding your waterway. So we look at the characteristics of Washington Creek watershed. We look at your terrain data. So this is your LIDAR terrain. So it's a very high resolution, essentially a 1 meter grid cell size of your elevation of the ground. We have that data set for the entire watershed. The land use data is really a land cover file that there's a national land cover data set. Looks all kind of colorful up there, but essentially breaks out what's woodlands, what's an urban area, what's, cropland, what's just grassland. So there's a whole bunch of breakout of land cover there. That's commonly used to help determine coefficients for how water would run off those property. And then lastly there, the soils data. So depending on the type of soil, like I mentioned, a class D as in dog soil is a very clayey soil versus a class A would be like a sandy soil that soaks up water. Essentially everything in red that you can barely see in the picture is essentially a clayey type of soil. So it's very high runoff potential. So the precipitation data we use, so in a typical FEMA flood study, you would have your 10% chance or your 10-year flood, a 4% chance or your 25-year flood. 2% would be a 50-year flood, 1% a 100-year flood, and a 0.2 is your 500-year flood. So those are typical ranges we look at. And then using the data from Lawrence, the projected 2,100-year precipitation would show an increase in that rainfall value. So, that 500-year down at the bottom, you see it's like 11.22 inches of rain within that 24-hour time period. The colorful picture there, essentially the rainfall accumulation from that 2019 flood event. The pinker areas you see is a higher intensity. So you can't see that scale, but essentially like about 11.5 inches of rainfall intensity from that storm, where the very pinkish is. Then it tapers off to about 5 to 6 inches. So it's hard to say this is a 100-year storm or a 500-year storm when it's so variable across a watershed. But you could imagine that because that high intensity, you had essentially a flood event that was ranging around that 100 to 500-year event from 2019. So we took those rainfall events and we modeled those. We took the 2019 flood event, we modeled those as well. And then we want to look at, all right, within this watershed, what sort of nature-based solutions are applicable for this watershed? So I'll go over that top 10 list, and you'll see on the upper right side whether if we considered this one for this watershed or not. And then I'll go at the very end of which ones we finally chose. So stream restoration is very, well, let me back up. The stream at Washington Creek already is actually a pretty good looking stream. It's good quality. It's got good connection to the floodplain. It's pretty undeveloped, so it's actually doing pretty well. So trying to restore it, a stream that's already doing all right, we don't need to worry about that one for this watershed. Floodplain reconnection. This is when you have like a divide, typically like a levee system, roadway systems, or some sort of barrier that prevents that floodplain from expanding to its natural floodplain. Again, not applicable here because we already have a pretty undeveloped natural floodplain. Wetlands, or out west, you got the Playa Lake restoration, preservation. Wetlands is a good one. We have wetlands in this watershed, so it stores water, it holds water, it kind of slows the water down, and also has a lot of other potential benefits from it. So that's one we're thinking about. Waterfront, stormwater parks. So this is really more of an urban development type of area where you kind of restore the watershed and make a park out of it and have some stormwater infrastructure there. So that's not applicable here. Detention and retention basins. So essentially a dam or a pond. So that does reduce flood hazards. It has other consequences, but you can make them pretty natural and have a lot of other benefits. So that's something that is applicable in this watershed if we want to consider. Green streets, typically more of an urban area where you kind of restore the curbs and the medians into more of a greenscape to absorb stormwater. Not applicable in this one for now. Bioretention and bioswales are very similar. Great for capturing water quality. Contaminants, your 1 year, 2 year type of rainfall events. But for this particular study, we didn't consider this one. Land conservation, so just keeping space the way it is, open space, keep it natural, keep the natural habitat. That was definitely one we considered here. And then soil health, best management practices. So those healthy soils with good root systems in it, they typically allow more infiltration to go in, but versus something that's very compacted. So that's another one. If you keep those healthy soils locations undeveloped or well, essentially undeveloped, then that's worthwhile considering. Last one was urban trees and forests. So trees, forests and everything are great for capturing stormwater, slowly releasing that water out. So that's a really good one. So as we looked at all that top 10 list, we really narrowed it down to was most applicable to the watershed, also what's kind of within the parameters of our study and our modeling that we can do in a quick turnaround. So we settled in on more of the land conservation type of practices. So conserve the land, keep it open space, conserve the healthy soil areas, and then that's what we were able to model in this particular project. Okay, so to the modeling. So this is a typical, so the growth region 1, I believe, is the City of Lawrence growth region, that if they were to further expand and develop. So that would be an area that could get developed. And then we went ahead and applied just a future, very future assumption. So you just think about Lenexa and Olathe and all the development around there, getting this whole watershed fully developed with residential and commercial properties, that could be very realistic. So we went ahead and modeled that future growth way out to assume that essentially the whole watershed is developed. And then we applied the different nature-based solutions, such as the conservation space and the soils. And we modeled that 10-year event and then the 2019 flood event. So how we developed, or how we assumed what a future development will look like, we essentially took a little clip from the Rock Chalk Park area. So your houses, your suburb type of development, if that would to take place throughout the entire watershed, we use that sort of land cover, curve numbers that come out of that. And we just applied that to all the entire watershed. So maybe unrealistic, but we want to look at kind of that worst case first. So this map kind of just shows essentially everything in yellow that you see would be essentially a quarter-acre lot, Rock Chalk Park. So that's a lot. That includes no channel setbacks, no conservation of space. So if we are looking at the channel setbacks, kind of that conservation area, we did look at I think it was the draft code, Lawrence Land Development Code. And we looked at what they were considering for the assumed channel and then preserving setback and then limited use setback and determine that total setback width. It varies based on drainage area. But the little caveat on this that we noticed was, or the FEMA special flood hazard area or the limited use setback, whichever is greater. So to make it simple on us, we just looked at the existing special flood hazard area on the FEMA's flood insurance rate map. So essentially your 100-year floodplain boundary, and use that as that conservation setback. So that'll look like this, right? So you got the setback, and then underneath that, we have all the existing land cover that's already there. So that's what the color's there. So you see you've got quite a network of stream channels throughout the entire watershed that would be conserved and then keep it as the same land cover. And then we just quickly looked at the healthy soils. We got that data set from, I think the Corps of Engineers had this data set for us, and we also talked with the county about what's a healthy soil area and also clipped those out of it. So this final map here essentially shows everything in yellow is that urban development type of area, then everything aerial photo looking would be your preservation. So our results, when we modeled this, so this is a hydrograph. So this is essentially how much flow is going down Washington Creek at the outlet over time. And in the 10-year event, when we looked at this, essentially the red dotted dash line would be your future conditions, fully developed future conditions, no nature-based solutions whatsoever. The black solid line, it would be the current conditions today with existing land cover. And so it jumps up. Now, it's not jump up a whole lot, looks like 5,000 cubic feet per second compared to roughly 5,600. But then we start adding in those nature-based solutions to it. We drop that developed condition down to current conditions. So what that does is saying, well, we could mitigate future flood, future runoff by keeping this nature-based solutions in the watershed. But then we look at the 2019 event, your really large flood events. That's a lot harder to do with just nature-based solutions. Similar colors. Black is the existing, red dashed line is the future, and then the yellow and green are the combination of the nature-based solutions. So it's very hard to be able to knock that hydrograph down just with nature-based solutions alone when you have a huge flood event like that. So I'll show you some maps here in a second, but what this looks like in areas of flooding, all right, great, the hydrographs are changing, but how wide is that floodplain getting, or how deep is that water getting differences? So it's pretty hard to tell, but it was having a general increase in flooding area. So with the different current conditions versus the future conditions, flooding would keep increasing. So even with nature-based solution, it's kind of hard to keep that flooding away. So let's look at a few hotspots where we have some more detailed zoomed in data. So this location is North 1000 Road and East 1000 Road. So it's that new curve that was built just south of, well, it's on the main road going out to Lone Star. And this is the effective flood insurance rate map from FEMA 2010. So it's a little out of date and it's getting updated. So you can see in blue is your 100-year floodplain. The red hatching is your floodway, essentially try to keep this area clear. And then the orangish color is of the 500-year floodplain. So, there's a lot of flood risk here. But then when we modeled the 2019 flood event, everything in blue, even the light shaded blue, got wet. So it's a lot larger than the flood insurance rate map. And you can even see right there at the curve that the road is overtopped. And then in the red symbol at the stream channel, excuse me, there was actually a water rescue at that location from 2019. So courtesy of the county, provided some photographs of this area. So you can see the water overtop the road. They had to shut down the road so prevent people from driving through it. Again, this is about closer to the bridge near that water rescue location. Again, very flooded. I see the mailbox and probably several feet deep in this location. And actually, I think this was closer to the actual bridge itself. So a huge amount of water in this location that our modeling was able to calibrate to these results. This figure is also very confusing, so don't cross-eye too much here. But essentially, we're saying in the blue, you see that's current conditions. And then as we apply the future conditions to it, we compare the green with the blue. So the darker the green, the deeper the water is. But then as you start applying the nature-based solutions to it, this is for the 10-year event, the green gets lighter color, so it's less depth of water. So it kind of reduces the depth of water. And we saw that in the hydrograph shape. As it reduces down, you're going to get a slightly less flooding. But the extent of flooding is basically the same. So, a few more inches or half a foot of flooding difference doesn't mean a whole lot horizontally, but it could mean enough to get into your first floor or your garage. But then again, when you look at that 2019 flood event, it kind of had no real major difference. The shades of green are still the same shades of green. Distribution of it is within the error tolerance of a modeling. So it's really hard to mitigate the flood risk of those major floods. A similar area, Lone Star, same sort of thing. A lot of flooding, modeled that met that expectation. There's already existing buyouts for using FEMA's hazard mitigation grant program funds to help buy out repetitive loss property. So we're trying to keep people out of harm's way. Same sort of thing. Photos show the flood event of that area. And then similar of our modeling, the shades of greens get a little bit lighter in this 10-year so that the depths of flooding is a little bit less. Whereas in the 2019 flood event, even if it may drop down, you get higher flow velocities and such, which also cause erosion problems. So it's hard to mitigate it there. So really the key takeaway in this, nature-based solutions in this, as we've modeled and tested in this watershed, are helpful with small flood events. So they really help reduce the 2-year, 10-year type of flood events. When you get to the major floods, it's really hard to do with just nature-based solutions. So the big key there is only way you can reduce your flood risk, if you can't reduce that hazard down, you're gonna have to reduce your consequences down. You have to reduce that vulnerability. So keeping people away, keeping homes away, keeping infrastructure away from that flood area, let the river flow, let the river breathe, is the easiest way to keep flood risk down. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So within that kind of final conclusion that you were giving us, is there a map that comes out of that also to say these are the areas that we really need to stay away from? And I know part of that is in the Lawrence Tier 3 growth area that you mentioned as that kind of first development area that you lined out. But
Right.
do you have a firm recommendation for what that, you said that nature-based solutions cannot protect this area, it really needs to be separated from further development?
Not in this presentation, but that is part of it, yes. So you could show, this is where you could zoom in. Generally, right now, we just said, keep the floodplain, open floodplain. So keep the open space from the existing flood insurance rate map or whatever new updated flood insurance rate map comes out. Keep that area open. I know there's going to be floodplain management ability to develop in those areas under certain conditions. But if we start thinking ahead of the game with potential increase in rainfall, let's keep those areas more open because that just keeps that risk down. So easy answer is keep the 100-year or even a 500-year floodplain open. We could zoom in on more strategic locations and say, hey, this is more higher risk of flooding, higher velocities type of thing that we could look at that with the modeling. It just matters where we want to zoom in and zoom out.
Ask another question before I turn loose of it. You mentioned soil health best practices and kind of called that as status quo for the land use that's there, but most of our soil health best practices are not greatly utilized in Douglas County on our agricultural lands. Is that part of something that can be modeled also to say if we were to really institute cover crops and no-till or rotational grazing or some of those pieces that really help the ground infiltrate, even clay soils, is that something that would be a nature-based solution that could be also modeled here?
We can. So I didn't get into it because what you can do with these nature-based solutions is further enhance it even more. So the soil health is a great example. What if you put more areas that would adopt the soil health management practices? Then that also helps increase that infiltration. You could add that detail in the modeling. Woodlands and preserving woodlands. What if you put in more woodlands or that would also help too. The wetlands type of thing too. So we just looked at quickly existing and kept it open, but then if you start adding in those enhancements to that modeling, then you can start seeing those benefits later on. And that's how you can start reducing down that flood hazard itself, right? Enhancing those solutions.
Is there kind of industry accepted standards for as you add these, especially cover crops, what that does to infiltration? Are those kind of general numbers that are used and known?
I don't know them off the top of my head. I'd say it's very young in its science and documentation on how this really applied. And same with your rain gardens and your bioswales and such, how there's a lot of water quality aspects to it, but how much actual reduction of flood risk does it do? There's some science out there, some papers out there, and we got to make it better. So we've been doing research for a long time trying to find those papers to get those hard numbers, but it's always case by case, watershed by watershed locations that can really get that data.
Commissioners, do you have some initial questions? Go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. My first question is just honestly out of curiosity. if you have awareness about what the Kansas Department of Agriculture and FEMA, I think, right? Yeah, so both of them that sort of have initiated this program. Can you give us any context for what you know their sort of intent to with this type of modeling and these reports statewide might look like, and if they're, I would like to presume that it's maybe going towards some potential statewide policy opportunities, but I'm just curious if you know much more context about that.
Yeah. So there's, the context really comes from FEMA down more than the statewide policy. I don't know exactly what they're doing there, but they are essentially modeling the entire state of Kansas using a two-dimensional hydraulic modeling. The model is developed by the Corps of Engineers. HEC-RAS is a common term that a lot of people know. Super robust. So they are modeling the entire state. They're actually pretty close to getting done to that with that. And with that context of more robust modeling, more data with it. So you got the velocities now, you got your flood depths, you could calculate what's your risk profile, combine that with your building infrastructure, your lowest adjacent grade to the homes. So you start getting structure by structure risk assessment type of profile. And it's not really setting up policy things, but it's just setting the data's here now, local government. What can you do with this to go above and beyond just what the National Flood Insurance Program requires?
That was a perfect segue to my question for Tanya, which is, and I heard you say at the beginning that, and in the memo, there's a lot more thought and discussion to be had about how this report and all this data might be useful to us, but I'm just curious, within your own team, if you've started thinking or talking about some just real tangible, applicable ways to reference this data for certain functions that your office facilitates.
I would say just using it as an educational tool would be a first option. So anyone who's in this watershed and is reaching out to us about building a home or an accessory building, that we're able to use this data to provide more educational components, even though it might not be regulatory. So just having the knowledge is, maybe the first step. This is also a small step in a much bigger picture. So this is the first hydraulic study that we've done of a watershed, or recent. So the next one that we hope to do a hydraulic study on would be the Wakarusa. So then we would take the information for the hydraulic study from the Wakarusa and Washington Creek and all the tributaries that feed into the Wakarusa, Coal Creek. A lot of those creeks affect a lot of unincorporated landowners, and then come with some ideas, tools, solutions, having a bigger picture. This is just a very small first step.
I appreciate that, Tanya, thanks. And I was hopeful it would be a useful tool for that landowner education piece. I know that's a big role that your staff plays in terms of just helping funnel information that is relevant, both regulatory and environmentally. So I think that's a great first use of the tool, and hopefully over time, with more of these, that there will be maybe some potential policy or regulatory opportunities that reveal themselves that can be something in the future that is applied to common practices.
Thank you, yes.
So you mentioned that this study was funded through FEMA and through Kansas Department of Agriculture. And Tanya, you're talking about applying this also to other stream systems and watersheds that feed into the Wakarusa River. Is that then a tool and a model that we can use and apply here at the county, or is that something that we would need additional funding, or would the other funding partners keep helping?
A great question. So we're currently kind of in the trenches of discovery of that. So we've been speaking with the Kansas Department of Ag on if they would have funding for technical assistance for the Wakarusa hydraulic study. They do have some technical assistance funding, but they've already helped us here in Douglas County, and they want to spread that funding statewide. They don't want just one community keep coming back. So there may be some opportunity with them to get a piece of that technical assistance funding, but then an expectation of matching and/or us contributing as well in a partnership. So we're just currently exploring that, but we do anticipate that Douglas County will need to invest money in probably the next stages.
Either of you can answer this question. So the location of Clinton Dam and how the dam is managed in terms of water flow also had an impact on some of the flood events that we had out of Washington Creek. The water couldn't exit because there was too high in the Wakarusa River Valley. Is that anything that we can take into account in this model? I mean, it's a whole nother variable.
Yes, you can. So it's just another scenario to run. So you can model it as no flooding on the Wakarusa, and you had that same rainfall event on the watershed in Washington Creek, and see what that would do. And then you can also assume very high flow in the Wakarusa and then the flood event at the same time. So you can start modeling all sorts of scenarios that our imaginations can do, and different consequences. We even are working on projects where they do that Monte Carlo simulations. So you run basically thousands and thousands of model runs and see what your probabilities are and your statistical bounds of where water would go. And you actually come up with some flood elevations based on that. So yeah, it's.
Commissioners, do you have other questions?
My questions were covered by other commissioners, so thank you. I do appreciate the report. I did not understand all those maps looking through the pre-material, so very helpful.
I didn't either the first time. I had to be convinced.
I really liked the maps. I think this is something we'll probably continue to stew on and work with, our zoning and code staff to kind of see what tools, how we use these tools that are available and the information that's here. So I'm really glad for the deep dive, and especially as we continue to have conversations with the City of Lawrence about when and where and how they plan to develop, and where new housing is going to go, and what it looks like if that tier 3 does get built out in the way it may or may not be planned for, what impacts that has on things that might be built now or built in the near future.
Thank you, commissioners. And yeah, you summarized it really well. The only other thing I was going to add is just that we wanted to have this on the same agenda as we were talking about open space and having some of those conversations about the Wakarusa study, and just to give you a sense of the kind of data we're trying to pull together to inform that work. But
Yeah, this is also a public comment item. Is there anyone here in the room who would like to give us public comment on the Washington Creek study? Seeing no hands in the room. Sarah, do we have anyone online that wants to speak? Okay, thank you. Closing public comment, bringing back to commissioners. Any further closing thoughts? Or very appreciative of this study. I think this is, getting a deep dive in one area helps us understand our other areas better too. So, and this has been one that's certainly had its set of problems, and we certainly have had this FEMA buyouts for houses that are frequently flooding in that area too. All right, thank you very much for being here. That brings us to our next item, which is our legislative statement. We have a few people who've stayed here for that, and
Jake is
Jake
going
is going to start.
Yeah, Jake's going to kick us off.
Thanks, Commissioners. Jake Broadbent, Management Analyst. Tonight we have the 2025 Legislative Statement. It's attached in your packet. This year we worked with Little Government Relations and department heads to get it down to 2 pages so it's more concise and digestible for our busy state legislators. The first page highlights our 5 broad legislative priorities, and page 2 lists specific legislation the county supports. Shelby Ostrom with Lawrence Douglas County Public Health is online if you would like more information about the Healthy School Meals for All item on page 2. And we also have Mallory Lutz from Little Government Relations to discuss the draft statement and answer any questions you have.
My first question, Jake, would be about timeline. Usually we get a chance to see this and stew on it and get any public feedback, and then it comes back to our agenda before we would finalize that. We usually present this in about January, I think, publicly. What's the timeline expected for this conversation?
Tentatively have it come back to you on the 20th, if that works for commissioners. So give you some time to see it now and provide us with any edits and comment. And then if you, we'll put it back. Our plan was to put it on the agenda for the 20th for approval.
I didn't go back and pull last year's legislative statement, but I know I was probably one of the ones that kept adding things. So getting it streamlined and back on 2 pages. Are there any major issues or even minor ones that kind of had to get left out in order to get this? And I understand we're looking at trying to communicate with legislators and get them get our priorities in front of them as quickly as possible in the time that they will look at it, and then we can continue to follow up and advocate on any other issues too.
I mean, we did take a lot of things off, but I think we think this feels pretty solid for what we need to represent to the legislature.
I think we also tried to be reflective of, we worked with Little Government Relations for a few years now, and I think they do a good job of identifying the local government issues. If there's always a section on their documents that highlight those, and we always also do check-in meetings with pre-planning meetings with them, which we did with Stuart and Mallory earlier this year, just to try to understand what are the things that we need to be thoughtful of that we do want to make sure that we weigh in on, combined with those what we know are going to be the local government issues that we need to be. That Little Government Relations is already hearing are going to be things that are going to be coming through the legislature. So we tried to balance those things out and keep it and keep the document fresh as well, so that we have a higher likelihood of engagement.
One that I know or at least I talked about over the last year, and I think there's a plan for it to come back, is that the Kansans for Conservation organization has been trying to get a state conservation fund established, because we're missing out on federal funds for just not having anything matching. And as we continue to talk about open space and what are funding mechanisms for that, I think that could be another priority, at least that I would pull forward. And that may be just a conversation we have with, or let other commissioners stew on that before it comes back the next time, if that's something we can squeeze onto page 2.
Well, and I want to say that, if that comes back, then nothing's preventing us from issuing a letter of support, testimony, those types of things for a very specific piece, that it just doesn't, that we can do that during the session, even if it's not on the platform.
Commissioners, thoughts and questions?
I appreciate your questions, Commissioner Willie, and your comment, Sarah, just made me think about how when I was reading this, I was interested in beyond the legislative priorities that we set and that are sort of used to try and reach and engage with legislators at the start of a session. I'm sort of interested, I'd say, especially with us expanding commission, I think it might be a good conversation early next year to think about other ways in which we as a commission engage with state legislative issues. So different ways of providing testimony. And we get legislative updates throughout the year from Little Government Relations, and sometimes there's something that for one reason or another sort of rises to the level of we might provide a letter of support or further written testimony or sort of explicit advocacy. But I'm interested in us thinking through as a local governing body about how to sort of have different methods, strengthen opportunities to regularly engage with the state legislature on issues as they come up throughout the year, whether it's explicitly within our legislative priorities or related to other things that we're working on in the county, such as the example you just mentioned. And I will say I really like the formatting of this. I do think that it's a lot more digestible. I think that having a handful of key focused issues that within those paragraphs sort of draw out a few specific examples of that broader issue was really helpful. And then I do like that sort of tighter list of, more succinct list of specific legislation that rises to the level of prioritization. So I've gotten feedback from folks before who request and read our legislative priorities, or those of all local governments, that is a little verbose. And I have a tendency to like things that are verbose, but for the purpose of engaging with legislators, I'm hopeful that this format and more succinctness is useful.
And I think, Commissioner, you bring up a good point as far as something that, as we expand from 3 to 5, that we need to talk about with each other, maybe get some guidance from Mallory too, about what is the right way or the strategic way to engage with all of the folks that represent us at the State House. And as we're by 5 districts, I know we actually have a lot of people that represent portions of Douglas County, and that may just be how we divide that labor up, is trying to build those relationships, some of those which have been easier than others in terms of the outreach that I've done.
That's a great add. I made a note. I think that like at the first meeting we have in January, where kind of our kickoff conversation, we can add a little extra time to make sure we talk about how we can engage, what Mallory and Stuart think is particularly helpful. If there are more immediate things that we need to get to commissioners quicker so we can respond, so we can add that to that conversation.
Also, there's some important organizing, I think, happening around with other groups. Jake mentioned that Shelby with the health departments in the panel, but I know Jonathan's here as well, and that the health departments from the big five counties are trying to organize and make sure that they're collaborating around priorities for the legislature. That our health department is trying to be thoughtful about making sure that they're looking at what we have in ours and how they can be mutually supportive. And that applies also to the Kansas Housing Network that we reference in the document, and then the Kansas Food Action Network that we have referenced in there as well, that I think is important.
And so for fellow commissioners, I'll be attending that 5 county meeting along with Sarah on Friday. And I know this is just a draft document in terms of our priorities, but that will give us some talking points. So if you have any things that you specifically think are likely to change or need to be added, that might be a good conversation just to arm us with that going in for that Friday morning meeting.
Are you talking this Friday?
Yes.
The only thing I would add is, before we get too far ahead of our strategy here, I think we probably should engage our state legislators in how we can best support, instead of just coming to them with a list of, this is all that we'd like, and this is how we'd like to communicate with you. I think it's important to reach out to them and say, how would you like us to communicate with you, what our priorities are? I heard the point made that we have a very large number of state representatives in our area now, and some of those relationships are going to take time to build. So I like all the ideas. I just want to make sure that we're thinking about both sides of that communication.
Is also a public comment item. Is there anyone who would like that's here with us, who would like to make comments on our legislative agenda? Recognize that this is a draft and it will continue to come back to us until we finalize that. So input is great at this time. Seeing nobody in the room. Sarah, do we have anyone online? Okay. Closing public comment, bring it back to the commission. Any further thoughts on this before we stew on it and it comes back to us on possibly the 20th? All right, thank you. So moving on from that one, we have an American Rescue Plan update, and I think Brooke is going to continue to keep us in the loop here.
Good evening, Commissioners. Brooke Sauer, Douglas County Finance Manager. Bear with me here for just one quick moment while I pull up my presentation.
While Brooke is pulling that up, I just want to give a shout out to what a monumental task it has been to manage federal funds funneling through the county to a large number of departments and nonprofit partners, and manage everything within what the federal government requires to be tracked and monitored and complied with. So this has been a pretty amazing undertaking, and Brooke has done a wonderful job with it. So thank you. Ready for the update.
Thank you, Commissioner. So tonight I'd like to take you through, since the inception of this grant in 2021, I'd like to just take us through a quick roadmap. So in 2021, the funds through ARPA were made available to Douglas County to respond to COVID-19. Between that time, and July 6th of 2022, county staff developed a huge public process where we gathered letters of interest from our external partners for community-led projects, and then also from our internal stakeholders, our internal departments, for projects that fit the requirements of this particular stream of funding. Moving forward, I'm just going to skip past to today. So we've spent about $17.2 million in ARPA funding through third quarter of 2024. And tonight I'm coming before this board to ask for a little bit of a policy direction for how we obligate remaining funds that were perhaps not, we just don't have a good scope for them yet. And then also to ask Commission for some direction about entering into some interdepartmental MOUs to obligate the funds for some projects that aren't necessarily under contract yet, but we have a fully fleshed scope. They're shovel ready. We just have to get the vendor in place. So there's some things that we can do to maximize those dollars here in our community. So moving forward into the future, we have a huge deadline coming up. That deadline is December 31st of 2024, and I'm going to use the word obligate a lot. And really what that means for us is we need to either encumber the funds, either by contract or a PO at the county level. All of our subrecipients that are currently in place are under obligation right now. So we don't have to worry about those folks, with the exception of a few that haven't quite completed their projects yet, but we'll talk a little bit about the plan to extend that deadline for those contracts. And then I have a little bit of an error on this slide here, and I just want to call it out. The deadline for those obligated funds to be expended is 2026, and that's December 31st. I put 2025 on this slide, so I apologize for that, but I just wanted to call that out. So moving forward, staff has worked really hard to come up with an obligation spending plan. These are for those projects that are internal, that have a full scope to them. We know exactly what needs to be done. We have perhaps vendors in mind. We're just not under contract yet, but we know that we will be under contract. A good example of this would be one of the open space projects that Commission was approached about in late summer for some Lone Star Lake improvements. So about half of the money for the allocation that was made at that time is already under contract. It's obligated, but the rest, the staff is going to be completing that work. So we've got some commodities that we still need to purchase, and those might occur after that time. So staff would be asking for authorization from the board to allow the county administrator to enter into those interdepartmental agreements, which will essentially obligate the funds and allow us to make those expenditures after that date. So, and then those expenditures would need to be made by the end of 2026. So we have, I wanted to also update commissioners about the status of approved projects. So back on July 6th of 2022, the county commissioners awarded 20 external projects. Community-led projects by our community partners. Those awards totaled about $15.5 million. Expenditures for those through the third quarter is $13,138,000. We've got about 3 projects that are still active and may continue expenditures after that date. 16 projects are completed. And internally, we've got about 31 projects. The awards totaled $8,175,000. I want to caveat this because the internal awards, that includes 2 awards that were really external facing. So we had a $1 million award for the Housing Stabilization Collaborative, where we provided rent and utility assistance. That's something that perhaps our community partners could have done. We did that in-house. So I'm counting it as an internal project, but it really was an external project. And then Jill's entrepreneurship ecosystem mapping project. So internal expenditures are totaling about $4 million. 21 projects are completed and 10 projects will be required to be under obligation by that December 31st deadline. So going back to that day in July of 2022, county commissioners, it was the desire to allocate 66% of the ARPA funds for those community-based projects. Staff does recommend extending contracts for the external partners if they can satisfy a few requirements. So I will require to see a construction contract. So I want to make sure that they're also under obligation to complete the scope of work that they say that they're going to do. And the agencies have demonstrated their ability to complete those projects. So I'm very confident in those projects. I would like to extend the term of the original grant agreement for just 1 year. That will buy us a little bit of time if we do have to go through a reallocation process at a later date, which Treasury allows us to do for contracts that are canceled or they can't be completed for one reason or another.
But can I ask you a question on
Absolutely.
that timeline?
Yeah.
So we've got our external partners that we gave them a closer deadline than what the federal funds were requiring, and specifically so we'd have some time to reallocate in there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I did it intentionally because I wanted to be able to come back to this body and ask if we wanted to go a different route or if we wanted to extend that should partners not have their projects completed by that time. So I wanted the option to be there to either not extend it or extend it if we needed to.
So the conversation to extend the deadline, which is kind of our internal deadline, was from December 31st of this year to 1 year after that. And so we would still have a window in there if there were projects that did not get completed in that time.
Again, yes,
Okay.
you've got it. And again,
Just
that
checking.
is intentional. We could have entered into those initial subaward agreements through the 2026 term if we wanted to. But I was concerned that we would get into 2025 and then into 2026 and projects wouldn't be done and we would be in a pickle. So it was intentional, same with the 1 year term. But I'm very confident that these projects will be completed within that 1 year term. So, and most of those projects are either currently under construction or there's a construction contract underway. So we've got some things to think about tonight. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our unappropriated balance. So when we talked back in July of 2022, departmental awards for internal projects, that 33% was $7,062,000. And then we had $753,000 that was left unallocated through that process. So the unappropriated balance has kind of grown, it's grown and shrunk and grown and shrunk as we've made changes. We've kind of used that, we've used that fund as a pass-through. So if we've had a few, and I put some tables at the end of this presentation that shows that debit and that credit to that fund, but it has grown to $871,000. And staff has identified some eligible expenditures under this award that could be reclassified and use that unappropriated balance. So one of the ways that staff has used that unappropriated balance is we have funded tornado sirens. So all of the tornado sirens, I think it's 20 of them, needed to be replaced in Douglas County. That was about $290,000. So we were able to obligate those funds through a PO process and get some of that spent. So there are ways that we can reclassify expenditures that have already occurred that are in compliance with the fund. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here on this slide. So to fully utilize those remaining funds, we do need to make a reallocation of the funds that are not entirely scoped out yet. So these are those projects that we had a scope when we submitted. We just don't have a vendor lined up. We haven't gone through an RFP process, and we've just essentially run out of time. We've got about $1.5 million that would need to be reclassified, and that would allow for the realization of the projects in that table below. And I'm sorry, that's awfully tiny, but that does consider obligations that are either existing or we're looking forward to in the future. You know, this shows data through the third quarter. These numbers have already changed. They change every day as we have invoices that are being paid, POs are being entered. And so, you know, it's going to be a delicate dance here in December as we start closing out these projects and reclassifying those funds. So these projects here are the projects that have a very well-defined scope of work, and we even have a vendor that is considered for the work, and we can be under contract, or we will be under contract soon after the beginning of the year. Staff would recommend an interagency MOU for these three departments for programs totaling $1.67 million, $68 million. Again, those amounts have probably already changed since I developed this presentation, and they will continue to change as we near the end of our performance period for getting those funds obligated. And again, I'm very sorry about the tininess of that slide there. Yeah, so this is really hard to see, and I apologize again, but Commissioner Willie, when I approached the board back in February, you had posed a really great question to me about how much had moved in and out of that unallocated fund. And so this table here shows all of the debits and the credits as partners have let me know, hey, I know you awarded us 185,000. We're only going to spend 171. And so I credit that back to the unallocated program. And then alternately, if we've had a program that has gone $900 over, I think I had one program go $200 over, I'm taking that $200 out of that unallocated balance and reclassifying it and adjusting that award. So it shows the original award amount, the adjusted award amount, and then that difference and how that shakes out. This table here shows the obligation status and really in expenditures to date. So if you could see it on this screen up here, it will show our $23.7 million award, and then that we've spent 17.2. We have obligated 5 million, and we have that 1.5 that needs to be reclassified. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I'm going to talk a little bit about the reclassification process and how staff kind of envisions this going. There's a couple different routes that we can go. Staff has identified a number of equipment and projects that we could easily do a journal entry for. They're within the performance period. And not only are they within the performance period, but they are in compliance with the fund. So a couple of these projects, one of these projects would be the Route 458 project. The expenditure to the capital improvement plan was about $2.7 million. So we could essentially use that $1.5 million amount that needs to be reclassified, that we'll have a hard time going under obligation for, and we can process a journal entry to credit that project back. That will free up some additional funding in the capital improvement plan should the commissioners want to fund any open space items through the capital improvement plan fund in the future. So that's just something to think about. Additionally, for the departmental projects that either one, they will come in under budget and maybe they have an extra $7,000 on their project. Staff can reach out to those departments and say, hey, do you have an expenditure that occurred between this time and this time that meets this set of criteria that we could use, that we could reallocate or reclassify to ARPA, and just kind of see what they say. And, lining up a commodity with a commodity or a capital with a capital is really what I would essentially try to do. So there's also a number of pieces of equipment, very large equipment, that we could process journal entries for that the county has purchased since 2021. So there's a lot of different routes that we can go, but from a policy standpoint, really tonight, the most important thing is authorizing the county administrator to enter into these interdepartmental MOUs so that we can get those funds obligated for some of those projects that are clearly scoped out. We just maybe don't have a vendor yet, or we do have a vendor, we're just not under contract yet. Maybe we're still negotiating or under an RFP process or getting quotes. And also authorizing, I'm coming up blank. And then authorizing the reclassification of those funds. So really just looking for direction. The CIP, the project that I called out earlier, Route 458, that went through a full RFP process from a compliance standpoint. That really stuck out to me because it met all the compliance requirements outlined in federal code. So that would be probably staff's recommendation to do that, especially if you guys continue to fund open space initiatives or projects through the capital improvement plan. And I would say that a lot of the funding that is left over is from that program, so.
And the Route 458 project, it occurred within the timeframe of what the ARPA is allowed to cover.
Absolutely, all of the expenditures occurred within that timeframe, so.
Another clarifying question about that. Were you using that as one example of some projects that you're considering, or is that a project that comes close to the amount that we are talking about?
Yeah,
needing to reassign.
Yeah, in all honesty, it was just an easy target because I knew it had been under an RFP process and it was a high amount, but it could be any project. So if commissioners were interested in seeing a list of projects that would be eligible, staff would be happy to compile that list and come back before this board.
But that is our recommendation, is to use that one. So if you're comfortable with that, we'd like to move forward. But if you want to see other things, we can do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
So Brooke, I think I understand what you're asking, but I want to make sure I understand what happens if we don't make some decisions. So, for example, if these projects are not funded with ARPA dollars, they are projects that we would expect would be asked for with county dollars down the road. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then if we don't spend all this money, it goes back to the federal government. It doesn't go to Douglas County taxpayers. There's no way to refund Douglas County taxpayers this money or reduce the mill levy with this money. Am I correct in that?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, other questions or thoughts at the moment before we have public comment?
There are a few projects on here that well, to be honest, one stands out to me, and that is a request from Just Food, because we had a budget request increase from Just Food in our Douglas County budget, and they are underspending. Am I getting that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
so that is one of the projects. The executive director and one of their consultants have been in direct contact with me. They plan to be under contract with their vendor for construction by November 29th. So I am waiting until that date, and I'm hoping to see that contract. However, if we do find ourselves in a situation where one of those community-led projects can't go under contract, staff would not, might not recommend extending that contract. But it really just depends on the situation, so.
Thank you.
Okay, it took me a while in this small type to find the one
I
you were
am so
talking about, so
sorry.
I've got it now. So that's that 227.5 that has not yet been put under obligation.
Well, technically, all of our subawards for the community-led projects, they are under obligation.
Got it.
Technically, because it is a subaward. However, for the county, they're not under obligation, so.
They haven't met our internal deadline.
Yes, we have to push the pencil just a little bit to get them through, so.
And I'm sorry if you can repeat, are you saying that they're likely to get that under contract before the end of this year, or you're going to recommend possibly a year extension or have us have that conversation?
Yeah, I'm waiting for that date. So once that date comes to pass, I'll be in direct contact with the executive director there to see what the status is of that contract. And, it's staff's feeling that if they can produce that construction contract and it is executed and it is sufficient, that staff would be happy to extend that contract.
And another one that's large there that has not yet been expended is part of that Clinton Place expansion, which is that Delmar Place that we've done the groundbreaking. So that is that one that's changing here pretty quickly, that they'll be under contract?
Yeah, I actually think that they are already under contract. They get multiple sources of federal funding, and so right now they're working with their other federal funders, and perhaps their hope is to spend that money up front and then kind of have this trickle in through the back end. So staff is happy with that strategy. So I would be happy to extend that contract. And they've been in close communication with our office.
So at this point, the request is only about our internal projects. So that's that MOU conversation as opposed to, anything that is altering conversations with external partners.
Yes, yes.
Appreciate continuing to clarify for me.
Absolutely.
Other? Okay, this is also a public comment item. Is there anyone who is here in the audience who would like to give public comment? Okay, see nobody at the moment. Sarah, do we have anyone online? Okay, thank you. Closing public comment, bring it back to commissioners. the timeline, and this might be Sarah or Brooke, the timeline you're looking for is for us to, we have an option in front of us in terms of how we do that MOU and allocating the 1.5 to either Route 458 project or some other, or asking you to come back and bring us other options with that. Is that correct? Okay. Okay.
Sarah, we have policies on what we authorize you to make decisions on. Do you feel like this request goes outside of that policy or is in line with that policy?
Well, the obligation amount policy?
Well, I'm specifically looking to reclassify funds that cannot be obligated.
That's why we wanted to bring it forward for
So
commission
you do feel like
consideration.
this is
Yes.
beyond that?
Yes,
Okay,
so
I
this
just
is
wanted
why
to be
we
clear.
brought it to
Yeah.
you and to make sure the commissioners are supportive of that.
Okay.
Well, and I just want to add to Commissioner Kelly that if we do, if we reclassify funds and we reclassify it to pay for equipment, say, most of the departments that purchase big ticket equipment, they're purchasing that not out of the CIP, but they're purchasing that out of their departmental equipment reserve fund. So, you know, the thought was that if it were credited back to the capital improvement plan fund, that the funds that were, that have now become unrestricted, so to say, can go to support other initiatives that the commissioners desire. So, you know, if you guys want to continue with that open space project, this would free up a significant amount of funding in the capital improvement plan fund to continue those initiatives. So,
But in the same regard, if you decide you don't want to use it for open space, you don't have to. But it's in CIP and we've made it available so that it can be used for that purpose. It's in the CIP fund, which is one time, which is non-staff, which is consistent with what the commission decided when they made these awards. So we felt like CIP was a good fit, but you're not necessarily saying, you know, this is definitely going to open space. It just keeps open that possibility, which we will lose if we don't do this. Does that help?
Certainly feel obligated to use these federal dollars that have come to the county as direct funds responsibly and well and to the penny and not leave anything on the table. So that's certainly of high value, and I appreciate that staff has kind of given us some options of how we can make that happen. Also liked, and even though the ARPA decisions were before my time on the commission, that they were you know, one-time funds that were used for one-time projects, and this, you know, also fits with that ethic that we had too.
Yeah, I appreciate staff's trying to spend all the dollars down. I will articulate, we had a lot of time to spend this money. There's part of me that, you know, and we went through a very deliberate process. This isn't a small amount of money that we still have here at the end. And I really had hoped our partners and our departments had been able to spend that by then. I understand they're not, but I think that creates a little bit of an awkwardness here as we're trying to spend dollars rapidly, because it sort of, I wish we could have honored the process more at the very beginning and been there throughout all the way to the end. It's going to happen. So I think this seems like the best situation we can make of it, because I don't know, commissioners, I don't have a real intention of looking at lots of different and run this all through in the short time span that we have.
And commissioners, this really is just this one project. It's
I
really just
understand.
the open space project.
I can appreciate that perspective, Commissioner Kelly. Two things I was reflecting on when looking through this agenda item, and thank you for putting together all the tables. Yay for Zoom, and being able to read them on the screen. So I appreciate that update. I was reflecting on the original decisions And I do recall that specific to the internal project and that we decided to allocate 33% to internal projects, but it was a greater volume and a greater number and greater diversity of projects. And I remember that we had some discussion as a commission then about the potential for reclassification, excuse me, in the future, and the ability to sort of apply it retroactively. And please tell me if I'm misspeaking in terms of the sort of federal language for it, to expenses that the county had encumbered. So I remember us having those discussions, and so from that sense have sort of been anticipating that some degree of conversation like this would come back, and that best laid plans don't always pan out exactly as we originally intend them to. But I appreciate that the depth of knowledge about the federal code and all of the obligations that we have as a county to facilitate all these funds and make sure that that they're done right, and that we do spend it down to every penny. And then the other part that I remember that stood out to me was that intentional plan that Brooke talked about earlier, that's sort of giving a little bit of a buffer zone in the time that the federal government required from us, so that we had an opportunity to come back, reassess where we were at, figure out if there was something that needed shifting or that we needed to pivot and think about reclassification. So I just share that perspective because I've been anticipating this conversation, and I think I've been anticipating that it would primarily apply to internal projects more than the external projects, if for no other reason than it was just such a high volume of them. And then governments have such specific types of purchasing requirements and ways of doing processes that can sometimes just take longer than what our nonprofit partners in the community might be navigating. So I just share that perspective because I think that it's just important to remember that we did have the conversation originally, that we might have to have this conversation. And I appreciate staff's smart foresight to know to sort of build a timeline within the federal government's timeline to make sure that we didn't find ourselves in a rushed situation of we're worried that we're leaving money on the table and that we're sort of not thinking through fully how to leverage it to the best of our ability.
I appreciate hearing from both of you, since this was, these were decisions that were made before I was on the commission. I think they were very well done. And we have been prepared that it's the open space dollars that we didn't want to feel rushed into. There's a lot of community conversation that has to go into doing that well. And also that I, for one, was not interested in putting a community taxpayer mill levy to open space project until we had kind of fleshed out what some of that could be, and the ARPA funds were the perfect way to get that to happen. So in that we are leaving space open, leaving the dollars on the table for the open space conversation. I think making this MOU is likely the right way, the most streamlined way forward, and it falls well within all of the guidelines that are required by the mini guidelines. It's a very difficult task, as you've had to make everything fit there, but it fits very well.
Not that you necessarily asked for a defense of why we're in this situation. I do want to point out, like, when we made these obligations for this project, that we didn't anticipate all the time and energy that would need to be spent on text amendment regulations for wind and solar energy, CUPs for those projects, plus we extended work on the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan to do some additional work in the community and with the city of Lawrence. And those were some unanticipated projects that when we made this commitment, we didn't know we were going to have to do those things, which has led to some of the slowing down. But we needed to do those things in order to have a really solid community process around open space. So
Yeah,
not to be too defensive, but to just indicate like why it's taken us so long to get here.
We've leaned very heavily on zoning and codes and our sustainability department to all those things that you mentioned that took their eyes off of this open space conversation. Commissioners, do you have any thoughts, motions, directions?
Happy to make a motion to authorize the county administrator to enter into contract extensions for subawards interagency memorandum of understanding, what we also call MOUs, to obligate the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, funds and reclassify funds that cannot be obligated before December 31st, 2024.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Does that give you all the direction you need? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Brooke.
To continue talking about open space, we also have an update on the ARPA open space allocation for the Wakarusa corridor. So Kim, thank you for being here.
Kim, you want me to move you into the panel?
All right, good evening. Kim Kreiner Ritchie, Sustainability Manager, and I'm here to talk about one of those obligations that we would like to get in here at the end of the year. So I am here tonight with colleague Tanya Voigt. We're on the open space team, and this will be update number 3 of 3 of the priority areas of the open space plan. Once that was adopted in April, we promised to come back this year with progress on how we were going to apply this ARPA allocation to the 3 priority areas that were indicated within that open space plan. So you heard from us in July about park improvements to Lone Star Lake and how we were going to work with other colleagues in Public Works on bringing enhancements to access at that location. You heard in September from colleague Caitlin Amerlin about a partnership with Kansas Land Trust for strategic land conservation and leveraging funding and resources and expertise in that regard for land conservation. And our third, and I dare say maybe the largest of our priority areas is conservation of the Wakarusa River corridor. Within development of the open space plan, this area emerged again and again as a priority for its ecological richness, for its cultural significance, for its agricultural land, its ecosystem services, and its recreation opportunity. Really a convergence of all of the conservation criteria that was a result of that open space plan. So to give you an idea of the type of study area that we're talking about, I'm sorry, let me back up. We would like to launch into this priority area by conducting a very focused spatial analysis of the corridor. So really understanding what is the land making available to us there. And so we are looking at a very large study area going all the way from Clinton Dam to the city limits of Eudora. We've already begun conversations with them about even connecting to green space and their river access there. We would have to have more conversations as we get into agreements on the north and south boundary. But the idea is that we are really studying on both sides of the river, and looking for really understanding what data is available to us on the land there so that we can study the existing conditions, layer them from hydrology, floodplain, growth projections, zoning and infrastructure, cultural resources. If you look at the proposal that was in your packet, a very substantial list of the kinds of data that we would be studying and layering and mapping and analyzing in this so that we can, and I apologize, in this view, I can't see my notes, but so that we can create a tool that would help us make land use decisions while having this variety of considerations available to us and layered in a consideration and gradient. We have been very fortunate to build a relationship with a firm called Biohabitats that we actually came in contact with through the process of developing our open space plan. They are an ecological planner, a conservation planner who has brought together a really dynamic and expert team to help us conduct this study. And we are very excited to work with them. Working on the timeline of ARPA, really wanted to obligate this and get this kicked off before the end of the year. And so approach them with their expertise. This is the type of map that they showed us. They showed us many examples of the type of analysis they could do. We might not get a map that looks just like this, but this is just an illustration to show how we might layer the different values of the Wakarusa River corridor to help us really understand decision-making around that area. Whoops, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, with any notes you give us tonight, and should you have no objections to us launching into this study, one of our very first steps would be to form a project team, which would be larger than our open space team. We would want to have representatives of City of Lawrence, City of Eudora, Haskell Indian Nations University, and other institutions or entities that have stake in investment in the future of this area. We've already begun conversations with all of the ones that I named about this project and about being part of that team so that we can make these decisions together, create a tool that we can all use because we created it together. We would also immediately begin conversations with key stakeholders in the area, landowners, the development community, conservationists, others who have an investment in the future. And we would also want them to understand what the process is and what we are setting out to do and hear their concerns and answer their questions so that we're all on the same page with what this study would entail and what it would be for. And as you can see from the timeline that was in your packet, I mentioned we were attempting to really get this obligated by the end of the year and stay on the timeline for ARPA, but also not rush. Well, that being said, yes, we did have a lot of time to spend the money, and we did try to move as quickly as we can, but we also want to move at the speed of trust. These are big and heavy decisions, and we want to make them with the most information and the most perspective that we can gain from the community. The community loud and clear said Wakarusa River Valley is important to us. What's the conservation plan here? And helping us understanding the different layers of ecology, culture that is in that area, along with the human plans for infrastructure growth and how we can layer those things, identify priorities for conservation, and also identify areas that may be more desirable to steer or that are desirable to steer development toward and recreation toward. And so that we can balance all of those things within this very valuable area and create a vision and plan to do that. And I included the slide just to indicate where we were with our ARPA funds. There is an error in that. It's about 1.4. That would be expertly applied in Brooks' plan, if assuming that the Wakarusa Visioning Study is something that we move forward with. So with Tanya, do you have anything to add to that? Okay. Now, commissioners, any questions? Oh, yeah, of course.
So Kim, you were talking about the project team, and then, kind of later also talked about other stakeholders, including landowners. But within that project team, which is larger than just the regular open space team from county folks, landowners especially, because all of this is private property. And so some of it is like looking forward to the future, like what makes sense in terms of development and flooding. And some of the conversations we heard around the the Washington Creek study that we had earlier tonight. But it seems like those landowners really need to be very front and center so that there isn't, so to build that trust. They have to have a very key voice in there, because none of this moves forward without willing landowners.
Absolutely. And we're talking about tools, and we're talking about maybe future options for zoning or things like that, but all in a voluntary, again, in a voluntary nature. Noted. Yes. And I do want to make a note about the hydrology. The in-depth hydrology study that you were able to see an example of tonight, that is not within biohabitat scope. That is a different type of angle of technical expertise that we do have leads on achieving and then pulling into this study. I'm hoping it to happen parallel. One Tanya already referred to. Another is we actually did co-develop a proposal with the Corps for internal funding that they have available to conduct studies like this. That was earlier in the year. It's been a while, and there were some delays in their process. That is not off the table, and so it's something that we continue to pursue, and we know that that sort of flood data is very important to inform what this becomes.
I'm glad to hear that conversation with Corps of Engineers, because it's everything here is downstream from Clinton Dam, and they have jurisdiction over a lot of what happens in terms of the flow for the river, which influences hydrology and land use and everything else. So that's important. And also our emergency management department, which does also work with the Corps for like what are scenarios that would make for hazards or hazard mitigation below the dam. Go ahead, Commissioner.
That hydrology study, is that included in the dollar amounts that you're looking at here, or that wouldn't need to either be grant funded, state funded, or it would be something you'd come back to the county for?
It's not different from the study that Tanya was referring to earlier. So it is not included in this scope, but it is something that we are actively looking for other sources for and other partners for. That technical internal assistance of KDA, the technical internal funding of the Corps, and looking at those options and any of those options that we can find. But it may be something that we bring back to you to
fund,
to co-fund.
Okay.
It may be an
If we think
opportunity.
we need to do it. If we think we need to do that for the whole thing on the Wakarusa, we may not need that full hydrology. We may get enough of it from other places. This was really, this study is, what we're asking you to do tonight with biohabitats is more, I want to say it's holistic. It includes some of the planning and the hydrology, but it's really, we want to talk about the cultural significance. We want to talk about a lot of different things with this in-depth study of that particular swath through the entire county.
And this model that we had earlier in the evening for Washington Creek, that wasn't funded by us. That was funded through Department of Agriculture and FEMA, but that's also just a lens to teach us what else we should be asking for this. And that excites me too, that we've got something that detailed that will help us do a better job of digging into some pieces and in terms of, especially around flooding for the rest of the study. All right. Any other questions here? This is a public comment item. Is there anyone here who'd like to give public comment on the open space portion for the portion of the open space program for the Wakarusa Valley? Okay, and seeing no one in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone online? All right. This is informational only. So I think this will be an ongoing conversation. Really appreciate the work that our teams have been putting together on this, and this is an exciting conversation for our community. That is the end of our regular agenda. We have some conversations around appointments. Do we have appointments that we're ready to make this evening? Need to open that.
Get it to me for next week.
Commissioners, I did have a really nice conversation with someone who'd put in an application for the Burton Ash Board. I know there are some others that I have not seen yet, though, so I think we'll probably have to hold off to a recommendation. But Sarah, have those other applications come to you or come to commissioners for the Burton Ash Board?
Both. I've sent them to you, and I have them as well. There's only 2. I've received 2 applications.
Then I am behind. I have not read the second one, so.
Okay, it was attached to the Friday memo.
Got it. Thank you. Commissioners, any other appointments that you are ready to make? Okay. Sarah, that puts us to your weekly memo.
Thanks, commissioners. You've got an updated weekly memo. We've added some dates around the EDC is hosting a Rising Together in Panasonic update in December. So if you and the Sheriff's Office is hosting a graduation ceremony for the Corrections Academy in early December as well. So if commissioners want to attend, let us know and we can make sure staff know you're coming. We did attach a copy of the chip. And I know Jonathan has stayed through this whole thing, and I really think that I wanted to get that in front of you, and I do think that we need a full presentation on the Community Health Improvement Plan. I think that'll be a great thing to do next year as we're bringing additional commissioners on board to have that. But the chip is out, and you have it attached, and if you have questions now that cannot wait, we can get ready to do that this year and then plan for a fuller presentation in next year if you want. Lots of
CHIP, if you didn't say so.
the Community Health Improvement Plan. Yeah.
Thank you.
And there's a number of updates attached. You've got an October legislative update. You've got some different minutes, boards, also attached that. And that's all. Just a reminder, Commissioners, we do meet next week, but we do not have a work session right now. Our next work session, so a 4 o'clock meeting, is on the 20th. And that's all I have, Commissioners.
And I don't see the November 19th entrepreneur conversation on here.
I'll
Is
have
that-
it added
we
for
add
next
that?
week.
Okay.
I didn't
We may
get
get
that.
several of us
Yeah,
there.
we'll get that added and noticed.
And I also appreciated getting a hard copy of the CHIP at our last meeting. So that's it's available for everybody here online, but it's also nice to get a hard copy. Commissioners, any other miscellaneous items for us? Okay, we already covered the Friday meeting that I'll be going to with Sarah, and we'll report back what we hear. That's the 5 county. I think this is the first time that this has happened, really, to get the 5 larger counties in Kansas together to talk about our legislative priorities and see if we can help each other out with conversations. With that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.